These are photographs of plantation life, liberated people, and post-emancipation life. They are used as visual documentation of the living standards, the working conditions, and the process of slavery to freedom. The collection provides a perspective on the material aspects of life on the plantation, as well as the first-hand experiences of Reconstruction life. The photographs of children who were subjected to slavery are especially eloquent testaments to the system and its effects on the families. These images are a record of childhood in slavery and premature liberation, which bears both fragility and fortitude. They are also potent reminders that slavery had an influence on the whole family structure over generations. Captured at the time that freedom seekers crossed Union lines, these frequently documented the physical marks of abuse in the form of medical examination. The photographs also had two purposes: medical records and anti-slavery evidence. They are the instances of change of slavery into liberty, which can be full of trauma and hope at the same time. The sales of small commercial portraits of former slaves were held to get money to donate to the abolitionist movement. These pictures enabled the survivors to provide their testimonies in pictures, as well as earning revenue towards anti-slavery interests. They show the role of photography in being a weapon of resistance and activism. Schools, churches, and military units established during Reconstruction are documented with former enslaved people constructing themselves new institutions. These photographs define the post-emancipation era and attempt to set up education and community organizations. They give testimony of how tough and strong they are in order to build improved futures. The material facts of the lives of enslaved people are presented in the form of photographs of the places they lived and the objects they worked with. These pictures record not only all the oppressive actions of the system, but also how the people managed to live and survive. They provide revelations concerning physical facts of historical accounts. The images of the former slaves in uniform are military, proving their participation in obtaining their liberation. These pictures question the accounts that enslaved individuals are mere victims, but not contributors in the freedom struggle. They record the process of seclusion to citizenship via the military service. This daguerreotype depicts a high degree of scarring due to being whipped on the back on several occasions on an escaped slave. Abolitionists spread the image extensively in order to give irrefutable visual proof of the physical violence of slavery. It managed to become one of the strongest anti-slavery propaganda pieces that showed how violent the system could be in a manner that could not be captured by words. Ordered by racist pseudoscientist Louis Agassiz and carried out by Harvard scientists on racist pseudoscientific research trying to support slavery with phrenology. These were unauthorized daguerreotypes that were taken and then used to propagate fake racial hierarchy. The pictures symbolize both historical records and moral crimes, which have been recently causing discussions concerning the issue of institutional responsibility and reparations. This image, which is a companion portrait to Renty, has the same problematic origins in pseudoscientific racism. The photo shows how slaves were objectified and even at death were exploited by being on display. The presence of these pictures continues to pose questions on consent, dignity, and the morality of maintaining such records. In contrast to most of the photographs of the slavery era, Truth commissioned and controlled her image using carte de visite portraits. She sold them during lectures and applied photography as the power of self-representation and economic empowerment. Her tactic of using photography compromised the general power relations and exercised agency in a subjugative system. These Depression-era photos are accompanied by oral histories of former slaves. The portraits give faces to the testimonies, making great combinations of visual and verbal historical evidence. They are one of the final chances of first-hand accounts of slavery experiences as that generation died before them. Photo of a metal device attached on the necks and waists of enslaved people, so that they could not escape by falling to the ground, as this would bring to the attention of the owners. This inhuman invention reveals how far an enslaver could go to control and keep tabs on human property. The machine symbolizes the organized dehumanization and unstopping surveillance that was the order of the day in slavery. The photo of a sheriff and a bailiff with a black woman where one is pointing a gun at her head in pseudo-intimidation. This shocking picture explains why there has been systematic racism, violence, and intimidation against the black communities to terrorize them in the post-Reconstruction period. It records the involvement and acceptance by state officials of racial violence as a form of social control. The photograph of a group of Aboriginal people captured in a chain at Wyndham Prison illustrates the similarities between the enslavement of African people and the oppression of indigenous people all over the world. This picture records the way in which colonialism employed the same dehumanizing strategy in different continents to oppress the local people. It unveils the global presence of the racial oppression and forced labor regimes outside of the Americas. The picture of a Confederate soldier, Andrew Chandler, and his slave body servant Silas Chandler during the Civil War. This photograph demonstrates the manner in which the slaves were compelled to serve their masters even in a military context, in which they were subjected to great peril. It records the complicated associations between the slavery owners and the slaves in the context of a war that was partly fought because of slavery. Picture of the palm of Walker with the letters SS labeled as slave stealer, a reward to his assistance in assisting fugitive slaves evade their freedom. This photo records the harsh actions of the white abolitionists who were punished so severely by slave owners that they helped to free enslaved people. The branded hand was a strong instrument of protest and the cost some white allies had to bear in fighting against slavery, as typified by Walker. The cruelty of disciplining children is depicted by a photograph of a young enslaved boy who has to carry a heavy log on his head as punishment. This sickening photo captures the institutionalized exploitation of child slaves in the East African markets. It reveals how children were subjected to torture and humiliation as part of the slavery system's methods of control and intimidation. The photos of Afro-Colombian slaves who had to work in hazardous gold mines, which is one of the most cruel and dead systems of slavery. These photographs record the manner in which slaves were subjected to highly unsafe working environments in the quest to find precious metals. They demonstrate the operation of slavery in various industries and geographic areas in Latin America. Images of African Americans being taken into chains as gangs as the direct extension of slavery under the prison system in the post-emancipation era. These pictures record the way in which the criminal justice system was transformed into a re-enslaving mechanism of arresting and forcing people to work without reason. They demonstrate the way slavery was reinvented instead of being abolished and remained in the name of legal punishment far into the 20th century. Outside view of the old slave mart building and the street surrounding it, which evidences the real trade hubs where human beings were being sold and purchased. This architectural database demonstrates the process of the integration of slave trade into urban business centers. The building represents a lasting reminder of the key position of Charleston in the domestic slave trade and the acceptance of human trafficking in the life of the city. Interior shot of wooden cells and confinement pens that prisoners awaited to be taken to plantations to be sold or deported. This interior shot is unique in that it records the prison-like conditions the slaves went through before being auctioned. It gives us graphic displays of the infrastructures that were meant to store human beings as merchandise in the domestic slave trade. Large field shot of men leaning over lines of cotton with baskets, which defines the extent and type of farm work. This photograph is an embodiment of the physical labor of cotton picking and the sheer number of employees to run the plantation economy. It gives visual accounts of the ways in which slave labor reshaped landscapes and made the plantation owners wealthy. Photograph of slave cabins and outbuildings on a southern plantation in stereo, the living conditions and the arrangement of the quarters in space. This 3D picture gave a viewer an opportunity to feel the geography of the plantations and the separated housing offered to slaves. It records how the enslaved societies and homes of the plantation owners were separated physically. Large contraband/refugee camp and tents and families photographed in front of Union forts, documenting the migration of enslaved people in search of freedom during the war. Thousands of freedom seekers who fled to the Union safely in the Civil War were forcefully quartered in these camps. The photograph indicates not only the enormous magnitude of self-liberation, but also the demanding circumstances of the transition of refugees to freedom. Deck photo of freed slaves on a barracoon, or the deck of a ship that had been captured by British anti-slavery naval forces. These photos show the maritime abolition enforcement task and the ongoing slave trade, although it has been banned internationally. They demonstrate how trafficking continues and how the international community is increasing its campaigns to curb the vice by implementing naval actions. Black men in small mine shafts or surface ore pits in gold mines in Latin America working under coercion. This photo is a record of extractive labor slavery in one of the most hazardous modes. It reveals how the slaves were subjected to very dangerous mining jobs that in most cases led to their demise or long-term disability. 109. Freedmen, Children in Schoolhouse, 1865 to 1880s. Reconstruction era schoolhouse. Black children and a teacher in a Freedmen Bureau or Mission School group photograph. Education is resistance and community reconstruction. These photographs record the immediate priority that the formerly enslaved people put on literacy and education. They present a testimony of the willpower to achieve education which slavery had imposed by law and bloodshed. Early museums or ethnographic exhibit photographs of shackles, brands, and punitive devices which record the manner with which slavery artifacts were gathered and displayed by institutions. This meta-photograph demonstrates the process of changing the memory of the population and society, showing the way they decided to memorize and represent the material culture of slavery. It raises questions about appropriate preservation and exhibition of objects designed for human suffering. Communal memory and community building is depicted through group photos of celebrations and reunions by former enslaved people. Such pictures record the happiness, the strength, and the need to hold on to relationships even when one is free. They give testimony to agency and self-determination in the post-slave societies. The photographs and objects on slavery are also preserved in institutions so that they can continue to be accessed as a source of education and research. These collections offer academic background and meaning and create perpetual doubts regarding the ethical issues of display. They are a symbol of the changing attitude of society towards hard historical reality. This portrait is a studio shot of two recently freed slaves of New Orleans, Isaac, 8 years old, and Rosa, 6 years old, taken by the Kimball Studio soon after their liberation. The formal studio environment is in contrast with their newfound bondage, which shows the sharp changes in the lives of children. These pictures made humans the youngest victims of slavery and recorded the hope of a new generation being born free. This picture captures the days of slave labor on a South Carolina plantation, displaying the working conditions, attire, and connection with the land. It gives infrequent visual records of the labor conditions and life during the slavery. The image helps viewers understand the physical realities of plantation labor that sustained the Southern economy. Perhaps the first known photograph posing enslaved people with cotton, and it depicts men with large baskets on their hands, others using machines, and family members with children. This is a rare visual account of the foundation of the cotton economy, based on the use of enslaved labor. The photograph is evidence of the vitality of the whole cotton production system, relying on forced labor. Photos of the formerly enslaved individuals and their offspring dressed formally found after the slave trade, which illustrated strength and self-perception. These pictures are an anti-stereotypic depiction of dignity, prosperity, and cultural sophistication. They chronicle how the liberated individuals defended their humanity and status in the society by way of photography and style. Records of workers who were enslaved and recently liberated on plantations and farms, with descriptions of the nature of labor, equipment, and working conditions. These pictures are a visual testimony about the various talents and expertise slaves had. They assist viewers in seeing the complexity of the plantation economies that were completely reliant on the expertise of slaves. A daguerreotype of a slave with their owner, proving power relations and the reflection of the relations between property through photography. The picture unveils the sexual but exploitative nature of the slavery relationships. It demonstrates the way that the enslaved individuals were presented in the form of possessions and yet were not deprived of their human dignity even under dehumanizing conditions. Living Memory, portrait of an old woman photographed in 1941 who survived slavery to the 20th century. This picture helps to connect the past with the present and shows that slavery in American history is rather a new phenomenon. It offers a personal first-hand account on slavery, linking it to the present. The other image of the portrait of the most notorious abolitionist, where her dignity and personality are contrasted with one of suffering. Truth was able to manage her image through the clever use of photography to earn her activism. As shown in these portraits, photography was a tool of empowerment and resistance to some of the formerly enslaved people. Communal shot of liberated individuals during Reconstruction in educational institutions of community building after slavery. Such pictures record the short-term priority that the formerly enslaved people gave to education and the development of institutions. They give testimony to agency and to create more improved futures by learning and organization. Photographs of the once enslaved men in military uniforms, usually in groups, displaying how they served to achieve freedom. These portraits show agency, courage, and the shift between slavery and freedom as citizens with military service. They record the way in which the enslaved people turned out to be the active participants in their liberation and national change. The pictures of new free individuals celebrating and holding flags and gathered in churches expose a change in life, a change in lifestyle. These are photos of happiness, strength, and optimism during the liberation. They record the process of community building and universal rejoicing of liberty, and the ones who have lived to see the day of emancipation. The image of the mythical conductor of the Underground Railroad and the abolitionist made human. The face of slavery resistance was made human. The stately portrait of Tubman challenges the stereotypical portrayal of her and pays tribute to her uncommon sense of bravery as she spearheaded the enslaved to liberty. The photograph records one of the most significant heroes of America and her contribution in the liberation movement. Douglass was the most photographed American in the 19th century, and photography was a weapon of resistance and self-representation. His portraits of black people broke the racist stereotypes and proclaimed the human and the dignity of black people. These images show how once free people, who were once slaves, could shape their own story with tactical use of new media technology. Children were photographed in studios and displayed to the Northern audience to raise abolition funds in the Civil War. These were highly crafted photographs to promote sympathy and funding with focus on innocence and vulnerability. They demonstrate how photography was turned into an effective means of abolitionist propaganda and humanitarian appeals. Iron collars, shackles, chains, and other tools of restraint on photographs kept in museums were a concrete reminder of what techniques of brutal control were used. These documents are records of the systematic acts of violence associated with slavery in order to keep the slaves in line with physical restraint and torture. They are material evidence of the cruelty that could not be fully expressed by written documents. Caribbean and U.S. South sugar plantation photos depicting the backbreaking work that supported the sugar economy. These photos record one of the most cruel types of agricultural labor in slavery. They give visual testimonies to how the expertise and suffering of the slaves were used to generate wealth to plantation owners and the world in general. Displays chained columns of captured individuals being taken into slavery as they were made to walk long distances, usually with children and adults together. These photos record the slave trade within a nation that broke up families and transported individuals as freight. They demonstrate an organized disruption of family relationships that defined the spread of slavery throughout American lands. Pictures of liberated men, soldiers with plumes holding wives and children as family reunions and military service. These pictures depict how slavery was transformed to citizenship by way of military service to achieve freedom. They show the way the people who were once slaves struggled to liberate themselves at the same time establishing new family models. Rare pictures of enslaved individuals working on plantations in tropical environments in the Caribbean. These were the first of their kind photographic records of slavery outside of the American South. They give testimony to the fact that the European colonial economies were kept afloat by slave labor in the Americas. Images of the refugee camps around Union lines where in-flight slaves sought refuge during the Civil War. These photos capture the huge migration of citizens in search of liberty and difficulties in accommodating and sustaining them. They reveal the period of transition between slavery and freedom in the period of war confusion. Images of sites of slave trade in East Africa in the 19th century, which recorded the scope of slavery in the world beyond the American plantations. These pictures demonstrate the global character of human trafficking and enslavement. They give testimony of the working of slavery in different continents and cultural backgrounds as a structured exploitation. The image of the famous abolitionist and author spread across the world in the form of engravings that were later reproduced in the photographs. The portrait and autobiography of Iquiano proved to be strong resources in the way of revealing the gruesomeness of slavery to the eyes of the world. His image symbolizes the strength of people who have been formerly enslaved to narrate their stories and impact on people. The community building and preservation of memory. Photos of former enslaved Texans celebrating their freedom on June 19th. Such photographs reflect happiness and prosperity and form traditions which are still in existence. They demonstrate the way liberated individuals made their holidays and cultural life to celebrate the liberation and remind of the history. A picture of a building that used to be a selling point of enslaved people is also a stark reminder of the commercial infrastructure constructed around the concept of human trafficking. This photo records how slavery established whole industries and architectural setups that were dedicated to treating human beings as property. The tower is a physical testament to the commoditization of human beings in lower-order urban areas of the United States. Recorded evidence such as badges and documentation of patrols which hunted enslaved runaways, which indicated the imposition of slavery in an organized manner. These objects record the legal and social infrastructures that ensure there is no escape and control. They show the involvement of whole communities in the practice of slavery by having systematic surveillance and capture. Photos of unnamed graves, primitive tombstones, and the memorials of slaves in southern states. These photos record that even in death, the slaves were deprived of dignity by way of poor burial ceremonies. They are a good reminder that there are so many lives that were lost to slavery, and that there is a constant opportunity to honor their memory. Freedom Family poses group photos of the strength of freed families standing in front of their old slave quarters at the beginning of Reconstruction. These photos can record all these attempts of family reunification and the will to remain united after slavery. They demonstrate how liberated individuals tried to restructure family systems which were being systematically disrupted by slavery. Bell-topped iron collars to prevent escape, now in museums as evidence of the systematic viciousness of slavery. These machines were intended so that no movement could occur silently and create physical discomfort and mental degradation. The artifacts can be considered a concrete testimony to the creative sadism applied to restrain the movement of slaves and avoid their rebellions. Faces of old African Americans who were interviewed through the Works Progress Administration Slave Narratives Project during the Great Depression. These pictures give faces to the final documented accounts of individuals to have lived through slavery firsthand. They constitute important records of living memory when that generation had died out completely. The photograph showing the Ku Klux Klan with a radio in the hands of former slaves Jack, 107, and Josie Riddle, 86, is racist propaganda in the guise of goodwill. This is a disturbing picture depicting the performative gestures of white supremacist organizations that sought to conceal their violent motives even as they continued to dominate the black communities. The photo unveils the unhealthy practices of sustaining racial order even after the abolition of slavery. Studio portraits of very light-skinned slaves, children who were legally considered black, one-drop rule, as a tool that abolitionists used to reveal the ridiculousness of racial law. These photographs emphasized that arbitrary classification of race would place children that look white to the majority of viewers as slaves. They turned out to be mighty means of proving the absurd and inhumanness of laws that were defining freedom by birth and not by looks.